I have a problem. My existing homelab rack has been overrun, mainly by 20-plus-year-old enterprise and networking equipment. I've got stacks of IBM P-Series gear, stacks of Sunfires. This is a full homelab dial-up ISP that I needed to disconnect and move out of the way for other projects. I've got my pile of cables that I keep on the ground. It's a mess, and it's time to make some improvements. I'm going to build what I'm calling a retro rack, and I'm going to do that with this 42U rack right here. My old rack is 25U. This thing is going to be almost 7 feet tall, a pretty big improvement. In fact, it's sort of ridiculous that I even brought it in here. This will be a dedicated rack to permanently house things like my Sun Microsystems equipment, projects like my homelab broadband setup, my homelab cable setup, and all sorts of things I'd like to be able to turn on and get more use out of whenever I'd like. A lot of the gear I have isn't getting the attention it deserves, simply because I have to shuffle things around all the time. I have a lot I'd like to incorporate into this rack: retro enterprise servers, switches, hubs, routers, and it's gotten to the point where I have analysis paralysis. I'm spending more time thinking about it than actually just building the thing. So we're going to dive right in this video. I'm going to get this thing built, go over my plans and my goals, and we'll rack up its first piece of equipment. A Cisco 7200 VXR router, a classic among enterprises and ISPs alike in the late 90s and early 2000s, to serve as the backbone of the Retro Racks network for future editions. Well, let's get into it. The Retro Rack. I have been threatening to do this and build this thing out for probably over a year. I bought this 3 months ago. It's just been sitting in its big old box here as I've overthought how I want to do everything. But this is just another rather large component of my existing home lab, and home labs are iterative. You never really know what you want until you try it, as with most things in life that you're learning. So I just need to get this thing built. But I do have a couple sort of high-level goals. Number one is I want to be able to take gear that I've got and get it off the shelf, get it racked up so I can use it more often. I want this stuff in service and easily accessible when I'm ready to work on projects. That's what this is all about. I think once I have space to have all this stuff in more permanent locations, I'm just going to have more fun with it. It's just going to sort of improve my enjoyment of the hobby. Another goal is I'd like to have a network just for my sort of retro gear. That's what this router is going to host. There will probably be one network at first. We'll set that up today, probably like a 10.0 or something. And then many more, including ATM, token ring, you know, things beyond Ethernet, multiple Ethernet networks, that sort of thing. Today, when I bring a piece of gear, you know, into the shop here and start playing around with it, almost always I'm just hooking it right up to my existing home network. So it's going to be really nice to have that totally segregated and controllable here. We'll dive into that later in the video after I get this built. Sort of lower level, I want to have like a TFTP server and SNMP server. A TFTP server is really handy for getting files onto this old, well, any networking gear. So I'd like to have a dedicated one that my new machine can touch and the whole retro system has access to. SNMP is a monitoring protocol. These things can pump out tons of messages and you can get them flowing in to an SNMP server. That'll be a whole video in and of itself. And in fact, this is the beginning of a series. This is going to be iterative. We're going to have to deal with power distribution, wiring it up, getting cables into here. I have a pretty impressive trunk of cables just on the other side of that wall. We'll be sharing some of those that are going to be dedicated and going back right to this rack so I have access from this room. But that's enough yakking. I don't really have a good area to show you how to build this. I built that 25U about 4 years ago and I remember it being not too bad, a little fiddly. I suspect this tall one is going to be quite a bit worse. I'm going to get this built and let's make some progress. Okay, I'm about 1 hour and 2 beers in. I'll let you do the math on that. I wanted to point out a couple things. I'm about to put the wheels on and tighten everything down and put her up. The directions are definitely to draw an owl, you draw a circle, and then you draw an owl type situation. So I did this a lot faster this time because I've done it before, which really helped. I didn't really film it as I went because it's a mess down here. I got like a little remodel situation going on. As you can see, I like to put stuff in piles on the floor. My wife loves that. It comes with all the tools you need actually, which is pretty nice, but they're crappy. Come with a socket set. It'll just speed you up tremendously. These are very high quality components. I bought the other one 4 years ago, and I'm really happy to say that these are just as high quality as the first one. You know, nice powder coated, really good stuff, good hardware. Really happy. So here's my original rack, of course. I wanted to point out, at least on these StarTech units, you can adjust the depth, which is important. So like on my, look what I'm dealing with here. So on my original one, I went with 29 inches of rack depth. That was pretty typical. That's what I needed for these dells down here. And I'm gonna do the exact same thing on the next one. And so basically you just determine that by where you put these bolts. So I've got them in position 1, 2, 3, and 4, or put another way, 3 and 4 are showing on this end. They've got like a confusing chart to show you what, you know, numbers you should be on, but also you can just measure the cross members. That's a better way to do it. Just wanted to point out that you need to think about what servers you're putting in here. And in my case, the 29-inch depth worked pretty nice. One more thing. So lack of instructions, can't really complain about that, but there is a part of the instructions that is just wrong, I think, or, you know, I could be an idiot, still possible. This cross member on the bottom has 2 of these large holes, only on one side, not on the other side. Typically, the author of documentation would use that to their advantage to help the user orient. But clearly, in the StarTech documentation, they say that the side that doesn't have those holes goes out on this side, and that's just wrong. The thing doesn't fit together. I think you could build it that way, but it wouldn't be as strong, and it just doesn't fit that way. And I remember that from the other rack. I remember having to deal with that. So yeah, other than lack of documentation and this one piece being wrong, great unit. Look at that. I was able to sneak it past the other rack, and it's just huge. I find it so funny that I have a rack this big now. Look at all this space. I cleaned up all the crap that was in here. So yeah, I'm just in shock seeing it. I can't believe it. I'm so excited. I have plenty of room to get around it because that's important, obviously. So yeah, let's set up that router and get our first piece of equipment in the retro rack. The Cisco 7200 series came out in the late 90s, quickly followed by the VXR line that was a slight improvement. This one specifically is a 7206 because it's got 6 of these modular ports on the front. These are called port adapters, and the beauty of the 7200 series is they're modular and you can slide in all sorts of different stuff. These are a bunch of T1 cards that I was just storing in here, and this is a T2 card, I think, actually. So I'm going to pull all this out. We're definitely going to be looking at T1, T2, and T3 in the future, but for now I'm going to simplify this and just get a couple fast Ethernets in here, I think. Of note, though, is this huge blanking plate right here. Traditionally, on the 7200 series, you'd have one of these I/O controllers down here. This is where you could store the software, you know, your configuration settings, basically on these flash memory cards. It gave you a couple of fast Ethernet ports, this particular one anyway, and then the console port to actually connect to a computer and administer the device. Obviously, though, the 7206 doesn't have one. It's just got this blanking plate called the I/O blank. Kind of cool. On the back of these units, you have something called the MPE, or Network Processing Engine. It's this big old card that slides in like this. This one's been upgraded to an MPE G1. This is gigabit speed Ethernet, and I've got the GBIC ports or RJ45. I've got 3 interfaces here, and over on the right, there's the input-output for the console. So when you've got one of these newer MPE units with the flash card and the console, it renders the front I/O controller obsolete. For reference, here's an older, slower NPE 300, and of course has no input-output on the back. It would normally go here, and you would pair it with one of these I/O controllers on the front. So if you're looking at this thing with the newer MPE, you're kind of thinking, man, that's a shame. Look at all that real estate, and that's a legit slot that could be used for something. What a waste. Well, someone at Cisco must have had the same idea, because you can buy one of these. This thing is called the Port Adapter Jacket Card. This is like my holy grail 7200 series accessory, if you can call it that. And obviously, you slide it in the I/O controller slot down here, and it gives you another port adapter slot down here. So I'll be able to have 7 port adapters in here. I just love this thing. If you can find one, they're quite expensive on eBay, and I can sort of see why. I got this shipped $40 to my door, which at least at the time I was looking at these a couple months ago was a really good deal. And it's hefty. Like, there's actually quite a bit going on this thing. So yeah, I'm super happy to have this. It's got this like full metal bracing here. I'm excited to see what that looks like in here. But for now, let's get the physical setup going. I was just storing these T1 cards in here, and I'm not going to need them yet. So we're going to pull all these out, and this is actually going to be a pretty boring router at first, at least as I'm starting to get things figured out. I'm just going to throw a bunch of blanking plates in for now. Let's get this old I/O blanking plate off so we can get our jacket card in. Probably not a whole ton of these things out there in the world, so guess I'm happy to have one. This is copyright 2005 from Cisco, by the way, so fairly late in the 7200 series lifespan. I think I got that right. Oh man, this is looking good. I mean, come on. How cool does this look with the 7th port adapter at the bottom here? I've got it all blanked out. Do not worry. As this series continues, we will be filling these with all sorts of interesting cards and building out more complex networks. But for now, I can rely on the 3 interfaces on the back. Building out this network for the retro rack is really where I could get bogged down for years and get nothing done. So I'm just going to dive in and do the bare minimum here. One of these will be a uplink to my existing home network in case I want to get older stuff on the internet. So this will be a 192.168.1.something. One of these will be the network for the retro rack, probably a 10.0, I think. And that's what we're going to set up today, both of these interfaces. And we'll configure this one with a DHCP server. I'll also reserve some IPs for manual use. And then eventually I'll set up a dedicated, what's called a management network. All this stuff you're hooking up has its own IP addresses. The enterprise machines have kind of remote out-of-band management solutions for them. And you want them all on their own internal, what's usually called a management network. That'll be a whole adventure too, kind of making that as sophisticated as I can, basically. I've got this thing hooked up to my home network, so that'll be an easy configuration. Power, and then this is the serial console. We're going to configure it here in the room before we get it in the rack, and we'll also dive into this slightly more complex network I want to set up with the 10.0 for the rack. I don't think I've ever actually used this particular MPE G1, so hopefully it's in good shape. And I'm also hoping the fans on this aren't horrendous, so let's power it on. Not bad. The fans actually sound fantastic. That's a relief. It's coming up on the console here. Let's see how it does. These big guys can take a little while to start up, so you gotta be patient with them. It takes a few moments. It's complaining about all the other stuff that used to be plugged in that it doesn't know about anymore. Yeah. Let's see what we're dealing with. So I was definitely messing around with this thing before. That first address needs to be different. I don't actually know how to build out the DHCP server and stuff, so I'm gonna do that off camera because this stuff can be pretty boring, but I'll show you how to change the IP of an interface. I know how to do that in my sleep. So configure from terminal, and we're going to configure the first interface. We're going to say IP add 192.168. I need to go find a free address. 100 is available. This is one of the things that I want to avoid. I'm putting stuff on my network all the time, and just briefly to see if it works or make a video or whatever, and then I take it off, and I never remember what IPs are free. And so I'm very excited to set this up and make this easier for myself. Let's give it the mask. I think it's already up, but let's take a look at show IP interface brief now. It should be flip-flopping there. Yep. So now it's got that new one, and I should be able to ping my home networks router from here. I can. That's one step done. I'm going to do some research about DHCP servers and reserving addresses and all that. I'll be back. All right, I think I've got a plan. So I'm going to configure the second interface. We'll put it on 10.0.0.1. And this is sort of a weird subnet. I'm still restricting myself to, 200 and whatever hosts. I don't think you'd normally do this on 10.0, but, it's okay. No shut. Bring that interface up. Then we'll create a named DHCP pool. I'll call it retro rack. So I'm setting up a DHCP server. And if you're not following, basically that means anything on this network, if I just plug it in, it'll be auto-assigned an IP. I don't need to go in there and manually do it. That's what the DHCP server does. We'll give the pool a network. Again, I know this is an odd network, but it's okay. It's mine. We need to set a default router, which is this thing. And now I want to exclude some addresses from the DHCP server. I want to always know that like the first 100 IP addresses in my subnet are available for me to manually assign, and they aren't just going to get handed out. And so I will do exactly that. I will exclude addresses .1 through .100. It is probably a good idea to exclude the router itself. And then I'm less sure about this one. I'm going to set my DNS server as my existing home network. I think this means I'll be able to like ping out to the internet from the 10.0 network. We'll see how this goes. And then we are going to write that config to the flash cart and let's test it out. Things are already escalating, of course. It's not that interesting to just have this one port with my network. So I'm actually going to wire it up to this Catalyst 3550 series switch. I have several of these and definitely several in this line. They stack. Did a whole video about that. This will be my sort of, initial foray here. And it's a great excuse to use some of these GBICs, these 1 gig GBICs. I wouldn't necessarily have to in this situation, but part of the whole, setup here is to start using more of this stuff and putting it to work. So let's see if these things work. Critical piece of the puzzle here. I'm configuring that second interface again, where I just put that GBIC connector. And you actually do need to switch the media type between RJ45 and GBIC. It defaults to RJ45. It doesn't auto sense what you've plugged in. So we need to do media type GBIC, and that should be fine. Let's see what we get. I am already seeing a problem. This one's happy. It's got its link light on. This one does not. As you can see, it's off. That should be eliminated. So it's possible that this GBIC is bad. That wouldn't surprise me. These seem really cheap and flimsy. Let's try another one. Don't worry. I got more. Ah, it was bad, yeah. We're linked. Now the question is, does any of this work? It's doing some sort of auto negotiation there. It doesn't think it's full speed. So the theory here is this computer plugged into a port on this switch should A, be able to get on the 10.0 network, even if, just do a manual assignment. It should also just be served an IP. See how that goes. Well, that was easy. It was instantly assigned .101. That's the first IP available in our pool we just set up. Remember, I reserved the first 100. It thinks it's connected at 10 megabits per second. For some reason, that doesn't seem right, but that's fast enough for where we're going. It also got the DNS server served properly. I don't know if that's going to work. I might have to set up like a route to that on the route. Let's find out. So, of course, we should be able to ping the router. And we can. Can we ping Google? Not really. Yeah, so more to do there. That's fine, though. I don't care. I don't need these guys on the internet, and when I do, I'm going to tackle that in a very specific way so that I can, configure it to be on or off for a particular device and stuff. I think I'll get more sophisticated there. This is looking good. This basic setup is working. That's exciting. Well, let's get this stuff racked up. But there's a problem to solve first. So when these racks are empty and they don't have servers spanning from front to back, they're very flimsy. And I'm going to be putting a lot of this networking gear in this rack. And it's going to be on the front, so it's going to be super front heavy. I actually need to get a server or two in there so that it doesn't just, tip over on me. My original rack was quite flimsy until I got those Dells in there with their full-length rails. That's where these racks get a ton of their rigidity from. So if you're into server hardware at all, especially this older retro stuff, it never comes with the rails. At best, you'll get like this type of situation. It comes with half the rails, and they're usually totally mangled from shipping or whoever pulled them out. And yet, yeah, there's an IBM system P5 rail, or parts of them. Anyway, I keep everything and I label everything in case I need to part together a rail system someday. But to solve this, I think I have a solution. I picked up a few of these StarTech universal adjustable mount rail kits. So basically, it creates a little shelf on either side of the rack, and you literally just physically lay the server on top of it. What I'm worried about is I put a couple of these in and I want to stack servers, and there might not be enough tolerance to do that, but we're going to experiment with those P5s as it so happens. I need to get some weight at the bottom of that rack, and those P5s are super heavy, especially that one on the bottom you're looking at here. It's like over 100 pounds. So I'm going to install these in the bottom of the rack and we'll see where we get. Got a set installed on the bottom here, and you can see the basic idea. It creates a shelf to slide literally physically just put the machine on. I have a couple reservations. One is around tolerances. So obviously we're adding space on either side, both here and this other layer here. Will the server fit left to right? Another one is they kind of slide around and you have this lip. That seems like it's just going to be a nightmare when you're trying to put one back in after there's stuff above it. It's better than not being able to put anything in the rack, but we'll see. I'm going to manhandle that big 100-pound P5 in here. Hopefully it fits. And then we'll try to put a couple more things on top of it. Well, it really wasn't that bad. There was plenty of tolerance left to right. The next kind of trick will be putting one more on top. I'm going to put another set of rails in. We'll get another machine on there. Trouble in paradise. I'm only 2 machines up, so I've installed 2 of these shelves, and it's already caused so much space between each machine that we can no longer put the shelves in. There's no way to screw that in. That's exactly what I was afraid of. So yeah, you can't stack a bunch of these in a row. You would need like them interspersed throughout your rack, and then I think you'd have enough tolerance. Oh well. That being said, it is an absolute joy to see these IBMs racking up like this. And it's definitely good enough for now. Got some weight in the bottom of the rack. The rackier situation to mount all the networking gear is going to be a little less dire. This is a ear kit for that 7200 VXR. And then I kind of keep and tape up all the ears I ever get when I'm storing this stuff on the shelves, and I tape it up there even with the screws and everything. And I try to label it. This is for a Cisco MDS 9148 apparently. And I was looking around and I think these are a couple of ears for that switch. So I'll get those installed now. You would think there would be some sort of universal rack ear pattern and standard, but nope. They're all kind of different. I'm noticing the switch has its rubber feet, really nice rubber feet. Actually, so I'm going to rip those off in case something ever is below this, because it's just going to bump. I'll try to save them though. I forgot these VXRs rack really weird. So here's the ear, and you can only screw it on here, and then it's way back into the rack, and I think it's so that you can close a door, and it actually clears like this port adapter jacket card, amazingly. Or you can do one of these and have it sticking way out of the front of the rack, and I don't really like either of those options. So one route I'm going to go down, I think inevitably, is getting good at making these brackets myself however I'd like. And so I want just a normal one. I think in the meantime though, I'm going to actually use that extra 1U shelf and just have this sitting on there so I can position it exactly as I want, and it's just going to look better. It's slightly thinner than the standard 19 inches too, and the rack ear makes up for that and makes it fit perfectly. Yeah, kind of a weird piece of equipment. This will be the rack setup. Got the switch down here. It's got real ears. I'll put a shelf in. This will sit on top of that. I cannot find ears for this Cisco 2509 terminal server, so it's just going to be sitting on top of that. What this lets me do with this incredibly nice cable is remotely manage all this equipment over the serial console via my network. So that's kind of, I did just realize that at the last minute. I'm going to want that. And then I've got this PDU. When I flip this one, it's going to turn on this terminal server because it's going to remotely manage, you know, stuff other than this stuff. So I might not always want this on. And then this one is going to turn on the retro rack network. This is going somewhere in the middle of the rack. I'm going to go perform some feats of strength, and I'll be back. I guess I could show you what this racking hardware is all about. We got these things called cage nuts. They slide into the back just like that. Most items require 2 nuts and bolts. And you've got the bolt with a little plastic washer. Slides on like that flush. And then of course you screw your item into the cage nut. I don't mind these. You get pretty good at working with them. I think they look good. A lot of people don't like them though. There is another way you can do this. Instead of the traditional style cage nuts, there's also a product called rack studs. They're basically like a plastic version. Full disclosure, they sent these to me. Not to make a video. No strings attached. They just said enjoy these in your home lab. I've never used these, but I think they're pretty popular kind of in the home labbing world. So in a future video, we'll go ahead and give these a shot. And it'll just be interesting to compare and contrast your options versus the cage nuts. Again, I don't really mind the cage nuts. It's sort of a novelty to me to be able to even be racking stuff up in the first place. But yeah, we'll try these out in a future video. Well, here it is. It looks kind of stupid because some of the rack ears are missing, but it works. This one's fully racked. This is on the shelf, and this one's obviously screwed in. So we've got this one going back to the back of the router like we tested in the other room. This one goes to the terminal server to get it on the network. And this yellow one here goes back to my machine that I'm recording on. And we're gonna see if this all works. Don't worry too much about what it looks like from the back. Let's flip on the terminal server. It's on, I can hear the fans. Too bad it doesn't have lights on the front. I pointed it backwards because all the serial console ports are on the back of these things, so it just kind of made more sense. And let's flip on our router and switch. There we go. Beautiful. Let's go in the other room and see if the retro rack is alive. I think we've got a success. On this machine here, it's connected to that 10-dot network via the switch. I can ping the router, no problem. I can ping the VLAN on the switch, no problem. But I cannot ping, for the life of me, the terminal server. I set its IP address to 10.0.0.2. This thing is so confused. I'm getting responses from 10.0.0.6. I have no idea who that is, but he's out there somewhere. So yeah, I've cleared the ARP tables, I've restarted, I've changed IPs. This machine something's weird with the networking. However, that Linux machine is on the network at 10.0.0.101. It's not having any trouble at all. In fact, I can SSH to it from this machine over the 10-dot network. It can ping the terminal server just fine. In fact, we can use the terminal server for its intended purpose. Here we are consoled in to the router, the 7200. We can get in to that switch. So yeah, Windows, that's Windows for you, I guess. Anyway, this solved my problem. Pretty excited about the setup. Well, the sky is the limit now. I'm pretty happy with the progress here. The rack is built. It's got a basic network. I went back and forth about whether I was going to use just that one rack and put all this, newer stuff in it. And then I was like, well, is it really a retro rack? All this unified crap's in there. And I decided to keep both once I realized I had the space. And I'm going to use the top of this one for projects. So like an active project, I can put it up here, network it over to there or here or whatever I need to do. And I have a space to play around on top of the more, permanent setup that's over here. And there's just like an endless amount of stuff to explore. Cable management, for one. You can see this looking pretty good. Power distribution, which right now is this extension cord going into the other room. The original rack is plugged into this one 15 amp circuit, and this guy likes to trip if you put anything more on this. I've got 220 volt service. That's actually required for that P5 we put on the bottom of the retro rack. So we'll get that routed over to the other side of the room. I got to put in another, maybe two more, probably 20 amp circuits, one for the original rack, one for the other one, and 220 volts. A lot of the stuff can actually take that, and it performs, more efficiently. So I'll probably try to start getting stuff over to this, especially for the retro stuff, which draws more power than the more modern things. Down here, we've got like a HomeLab cable setup with some modulators, some screens. I'd like to move that over to the other rack, and that actually frees up space to do more stuff here. I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. And I guess if I'm being terribly honest, I'm getting kind of scared about how fast this thing is filling up. Like, I could effortlessly fill this up with servers if I wanted to. And the rail thing is going to be a whole thing. As I'm collecting, I was never worried about racking this stuff up because, I just put it on top of the other rack, played around, and then put it back on a shelf. And now I got to start worrying about rails and spending money on that. So, yeah, quite the adventure. I hope you all like content because that rack is going to generate a ton of content. I'm just scratching the surface. We got to get a trunk of lines coming in here so we can hook more stuff up like this Think Center, expand the network. I've got a million of these port adapters. I want to get a token ring network. I want to get an ATM network, more Ethernet networks, all sorts of stuff. And it's going to be iterative. So it's going to be a lot of videos. I'm going to cover it, from time to time. You never really know what you want, especially when it comes to this HomeLab networking type stuff and this older gear, until you actually try it out and get a feel for it and figure out, what you're trying to accomplish. So I'd been putting this off like way too long. I'm super excited that I just dove in this weekend and got it done. I love the rack. I'm super excited to fill it up, change it, redo it, all that. I hope you enjoyed following along this kind of infrastructure basic setup video. The other ones will hopefully be a little more targeted to like a topic, like setting up SNMP for monitoring all the old gear in there, power distribution, wiring management, running actual, applications in there. Super excited to get my Sun microsystem stuff geared up so we can play with, where did that thing go? The sun rays. It's been a while since we looked at some sun rays on this channel. Yeah, I'm excited to have this sort of more permanent setup for the stuff I'm really interested in and the stuff I want to play around with more often. I've found that works really well. So I used to collect a lot of retro video games and then I just wouldn't play them because I had to go set the thing up and all this. I find that I actually play the stuff more if I, on a whim, I can come down and just turn something on. And so it's kind of the same thing with this retro gear. So when you have the itch to play with something, it's nice to just have it set up, the network's ready, and you're good to go. Thank you for following along. I hope you enjoyed this. I had an absolute blast setting this up. I love building stuff. It was nice to build that rack and set everything up, and it's really something therapeutic about racking everything up, putting the cage nuts in, and sort of bringing everything to life. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. There's going to be a lot more content like this on the way. And if you'd really like to support the channel, I'm on Patreon. I actually did a sneak preview post when I bought this rack a few months ago. Took me a while to get around to it, but I like to post behind the scenes type videos, updates about what I'm tinkering with, what I'm thinking about, and that sort of thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I see you in the next one.